History, as they say, is written by the victors. But what happens when victory itself is only an illusion? When you find yourself trapped between two fires, an enemy army before you, and an even greater force closing in from behind. This is not just a military thought experiment. This is the true story of a commander who, standing on the edge of total destruction, managed to turn the tide of events with a plan so audacious that it would be studied and discussed for more than 2,000 years. It is the story of Gaius Julius Caesar and his actions during the legendary Siege of Alesia. The year is 52 BC. For 6 long years, Caesar has led his Roman legions through the harsh and untamed lands of Gaul, covering what is now France, Belgium, parts of Switzerland, and even northern Italy. Legion after legion, he subdued the proud Celtic tribes. Some were wiped out entirely, others forced into humiliating alliances with Rome. Caesar's campaigns were ruthless, but they brought him immense wealth, slaves, and treasure, strengthening his political power back home. Yet the conquered Gauls had no intention of quietly accepting Roman rule. They were weary of the iron hand of garrisons, of endless taxes, of grain and cattle seized from their fields. Most of all, they were tired of living in humiliation on their own land. A storm was brewing, and one man was ready to lead it, Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix was a charismatic and skilled leader of the Arverni tribe. He represented a new generation of Gallic chiefs who could think beyond ancient rivalries. Where others saw only centuries of clan feuds, he saw the possibility of unity. His diplomacy was shrewd, his will unyielding. Against all odds, he achieved the impossible, uniting dozens of Gallic tribes into a single alliance with one goal: drive Caesar and his legions out of Gaul once and for all. His strategy was both clever and merciless. He knew that in open battle, the Gauls could never withstand the discipline and experience of the Roman legions. So he struck not with the sword, but with hunger. He ordered villages, barns, fields, and harvests to be burned, everything that could fall into Roman hands destroyed. Deprived of supplies, Caesar's army would be weakened long before it could risk a major battle. At first, the plan worked. Roman supply lines grew thin, legions marched deeper into hostile lands, and their stores began to run dry. The prestige of Caesar himself suffered a heavy blow when he was defeated at Gergovia, in the very heart of Arvernian territory. It was a rare moment when a Roman general was forced to retreat. The Gallic victory lifted their spirits, and the uprising began to spread, engulfing more and more territories. But Caesar was not a man to break after a setback. He quickly regrouped his forces, gathering nearly 10 legions and strengthening them with a detachment of elite German cavalry, renowned for their ferocity and lightning-fast attacks. Emboldened by his recent success, Vercingetorix decided to risk everything. He ordered his cavalry to strike at a Roman column on the march, hoping to catch it by surprise. But this maneuver proved to be a fatal mistake. Caesar's German horsemen not only repelled the assault, they shattered the Gallic riders, scattering them and stripping Vercingetorix of one of his greatest advantages. Shocked by the sudden loss of his cavalry, Vercingetorix faced a critical decision. He chose to withdraw with his entire force, some 80,000 warriors, to a powerful fortified settlement known as Alesia. It was a place nature itself had designed for defense. The city stood atop a high plateau with steep, nearly impassable slopes, and on 2 sides it was shielded by rivers. Such a stronghold seemed perfect for holding out until reinforcements arrived. Vercingetorix knew that storming Alesia would be nearly impossible for Caesar. So, as soon as he reached the fortress, he took decisive action. Before the Romans could fully encircle the city, he sent out all of his remaining cavalry with urgent messages to allies across Gaul. The letters carried a single command: gather as many warriors as possible and march to his aid. The plan seemed simple and secure. From within the fortress, he would pin Caesar down, while an enormous relief army would strike the Romans from behind. Then the enemy would be crushed between hammer and anvil. For Caesar, the situation indeed looked almost hopeless, laden with irony. He stood deep in hostile territory. Before him loomed an army of 80,000 seasoned Gauls entrenched in a fortified citadel. Somewhere behind, another vast force was already assembling, waiting for the chance to overwhelm him. Retreat would mean a humiliating admission of defeat and trigger a merciless pursuit. A direct assault on the fortress threatened disaster. Caesar found himself in a unique position, an attacker who risked soon becoming the besieged. Many commanders in his place would have surrendered or desperately sought an escape from the trap. But Caesar was no ordinary general. He not only recognized Vercingetorix's plan, he turned it into his own advantage. If the Gallic leader wanted a decisive battle beneath the walls of Alesia, Caesar was ready to give it to him, but on his own terms. He devised a move that historians would later call one of the greatest feats of Roman engineering. His plan was both simple and insane. He would build not one, but two walls. The first, a ring wall about 11 meters high, would completely encircle Alesia, sealing Vercingetorix and his army inside, cutting them off from the outside world. That alone was a colossal project. But the true brilliance of Caesar's design revealed itself in the second line, the outer wall. Knowing that a Gallic relief army was marching to the city, Caesar ordered the construction of another, even longer wall, a countervallation, facing outward. It stretched for nearly 14 kilometers. In this way, the Romans created a unique fortification, a giant fortress in the shape of a ring, with the legions themselves at its center. They were at once the besiegers and the besieged. For a month, the Roman soldiers, long accustomed to being both warriors and builders, labored to exhaustion. But these defenses were far more than simple walls. According to Caesar's own writings and confirmed by modern archaeology, they were an elaborate, multi-layered defensive system. Beyond the main wall stretched a deadly strip of traps, trenches, stakes, concealed pits, and sharpened barricades. Every detail was designed so that any attack would turn into the enemy's own destruction. And the Romans did not stop at walls. They transformed the approaches to Alesia into a true labyrinth of death. First, deep trenches were dug and filled with water from nearby rivers, creating artificial moats and marshy ground to slow enemy movement. Beyond them began what a modern historian might call the minefield of antiquity. Beneath layers of earth and grass lay the lilia, camouflaged pits with sharpened stakes at the bottom. Anyone who fell into them was instantly crippled. Beyond stretched a belt of half-buried logs fitted with iron hooks. These snared the attackers' legs, tore their formations apart, and turned an organized charge into chaos. And finally, the entire field before the rampart bristled with countless short, sharpened stakes, stimuli, that could pierce a foot or entangle clothing, stealing precious seconds while the attackers were showered with missiles from above. If by some miracle an enemy survived this gauntlet, he would then face the main rampart, an earthen and wooden wall nearly 12 meters high, crowned with a palisade. Along its perimeter rose 23 towers, each armed with war machines, ballistae and scorpions. Every tower overlapped with its neighbor's line of fire, creating a continuous kill zone where no enemy could advance unscathed. The inner wall, facing Alesia itself, was built on the same principle, though shorter in length. The Roman legionaries, ever both warriors and engineers, labored relentlessly until the fortifications were complete. Meanwhile, inside Alesia, the situation grew dire. Vercingetorix quickly realized supplies were running out. Food was reserved only for his warriors. Then he made a cold, calculated decision. He ordered all non-combatants, men, women, and children, numbering in the thousands, expelled from the city. He expected Caesar to let them pass through the Roman lines, perhaps to buy time or to save the army's remaining provisions. But Caesar showed ruthless resolve. No one was allowed through. The civilians were trapped between the two walls, in the dead zone between city and camp, left to die slowly of hunger. Their cries and wails became a constant background to the defenders of Alesia, sapping morale and turning into a weapon of psychological warfare. Yet the Romans themselves were also under strain. Their supplies dwindled. Their soldiers were exhausted from endless labor and constant alarms. And still, time was not on their side. With each passing day, the great united Gallic relief army marched closer to the city. By the end of September, Caesar's sentries finally spotted them. On the horizon stretched a vast army, its ranks spilling across the hills. Roman estimates placed it at 250,000 infantry and 8,000 cavalry. Modern historians believe this figure exaggerated, suggesting closer to 100,000, but even that was terrifying. Command lay in the hands of a council of chiefs, among them Vercingetorix's own cousin, Vercassivellaunus. Caesar's army, around 50,000 strong, now stood in what seemed the perfect trap. To the front, 80,000 defenders inside Alesia; to the rear, nearly 100,000 fresh reinforcements. The Romans were outnumbered 3-1, a small island in a raging sea of enemies. Yet this island was fortified to perfection, fortifications the Romans themselves had built. The final battle for Gaul had begun. The first strike came from the relief army. Cavalry thundered across the plain, crashing into the outer wall, followed closely by waves of infantry. At the same moment, hearing the clash of battle, Vercingetorix hurled his forces from within Alesia against the inner fortifications. The fighting erupted with a fury Gaul had never witnessed before. Roman legionaries, already worn thin by weeks of siege and sleepless alarms, were now forced to battle on two fronts at once, front and rear. Sweat poured down their faces, their arms cramped from exhaustion, yet none faltered. Caesar, knowing the fate of the entire campaign hung in the balance, rode along the ramparts in person, calling out to his men. His figure, gleaming armor beneath a crimson cloak, was visible from afar. His very presence ignited the legionaries' spirit. The Roman defenses proved their worth. The first wave of the relief army shattered against them. Pits, trenches, sharpened stakes, and the disciplined steel wall of Roman infantry broke the chaotic Gallic advance. A decisive blow came from Caesar's German cavalry, who charged into the enemy horsemen with such ferocity that they swept them from the field in a storm of blood and iron. By nightfall, the first assault had been beaten back. But the Gauls were far from finished. Under the cover of darkness and fog, they launched their second attempt. Using ladders, hooks, and ropes, they scaled the ramparts, sparking savage, chaotic hand-to-hand clashes all along the walls. In several places, the Gauls managed to break through the defenses, but Caesar had anticipated a night assault. Under the command of Mark Antony and Gaius Trebonius, mobile reserves quickly sealed the breaches and drove the enemy back. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix launched his own assault. But his warriors stalled as they tried to fill in the Roman trenches. The element of surprise was lost, and the second attack ended in failure. The Gauls now realized that frontal assaults would never take the Roman fortifications. Soon, their scouts discovered a weakness. To the north stood a high hill that could not be fully enclosed within the siege lines. There lay a Roman camp, its defenses notably lighter than elsewhere. For the decisive strike, 60,000 of the best warriors were chosen. Commanded by Vercassivellaunus, cousin of Vercingetorix. All night long he led them into position. The plan was simple and deadly. At noon, his force would smash into the northern camp, while the main Gallic army pressed the Romans along the outer wall. At the same time, Vercingetorix himself would lead a massive assault from within Alesia against the inner fortifications. When the attack began, it seemed success was within reach. Vercassivellaunus's warriors stormed into the northern camp, breaking the defenders' line. The Roman position wavered. It was the critical moment, the razor's edge between victory and utter collapse. Caesar did not hesitate. Calmly, he dispatched reserves to reinforce the faltering defenses. But when he saw the northern camp on the verge of falling, he chose to act in person. Gathering a mere 600 men, he led them straight into the heart of the battle. His crimson cloak, the unmistakable symbol of command, was visible to all. The legionaries, seeing their general fighting at their side, found a new surge of determination. Yet the Gauls' numbers were overwhelming, and the balance of power still tipped in their favor. Then Caesar made his final gamble. He ordered his cavalry commander, Titus Labienus, to take several cohorts, leave the fortifications, and swing around the battlefield to strike Vercingetorix's army from the rear. It was a desperate maneuver, one that left other positions dangerously exposed. As Labienus and his horsemen vanished beyond the hills, the battle reached its peak. The Gauls were tearing into the camp, victory seemed seconds away. And then, behind them, the sharp, piercing sound of Roman trumpets cut across the field. Labienus had arrived at precisely the right moment. His cavalry charged into the Gallic rear with thunderous force. Warriors who had been certain they were about to crush the Romans suddenly realized they themselves were trapped. The effect was devastating. Panic rippled through their ranks. Formations collapsed. Warriors threw down their weapons and fled in terror. But their escape was cut off by Caesar's German cavalry, merciless and swift, giving the enemy no chance to regroup. The retreat turned into a chaotic slaughter. The great Gallic relief army, gathered from every corner of the land, had ceased to exist. News of their annihilation reached Alesia like lightning. Those who only that morning had hoped to see their rescuers now stood upon the walls, staring at fields carpeted with the bodies of the fallen. Vercingetorix was left with no food and no hope. Hunger and despair tightened their grip far stronger than any Roman walls. The next day, he called a council of war. His words were calm and direct. He had fought for the freedom of Gaul, not for his own life. Now his people had two choices: kill him, in the hope of appeasing Caesar, or surrender him alive. The chiefs chose surrender. Caesar ordered all leaders to lay down their arms and present themselves. And so unfolded one of the most memorable scenes in Roman history. Vercingetorix, clad in his finest armor, rode out through the gates. He circled Caesar, seated upon his tribunal, then dismounted and, without a word, cast his weapons at the victor's feet. A moment of silence, and the Gallic chieftain was led away in chains. For 6 long years he languished in a Roman prison, awaiting the day he would be paraded through the streets of Rome in Caesar's triumph, a living emblem of conquered Gaul. After the procession, he was executed quietly in his cell, without a crowd or witnesses. Thus ended the life of the man who had come closer than any other to uniting the Gauls and driving out Rome. As for the captives, Caesar's treatment was mixed. Each legionary received a Gallic slave, an ordinary reward for victory. Yet he spared the warriors of 2 powerful tribes, calculating that their loyalty would speed the pacification of the land. Alesia was the final nail in the coffin of Gallic independence. The great uprising was extinguished. After centuries of resistance, Gaul became a province of the Roman Republic. For Rome, it meant secure northern borders and new wealth. For Caesar, it meant the money to pay off his crushing debts and the loyalty of his veterans, loyalty that would soon enable him to cross the Rubicon and destroy the Republic, paving the way for empire. The Siege of Alesia was not just a victory. It was a masterclass in strategy and engineering that changed the course of history, even when faced with enemies 3 times more numerous. Double fortifications, deadly traps, psychological warfare, and flawless coordination of forces, all these elements made victory possible. Caesar faced a problem that seemed unsolvable, and he devised a solution as ruthless as it was brilliant. He showed the world that sometimes the greatest weapon on the battlefield is the mind of the man who commands. If you found this analysis of military genius fascinating, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories from the annals of warfare. Share in the comments if you'd like to see more breakdowns of history's greatest battles. And thank you for watching.